So hi, everyone. I'm using my laptop here in the classroom. Anais is here. The reason is because there's something wrong with the computer internet. It says no internet connection. So I don't know how to fix it without wasting all the time trying to fix it instead of just getting to the class. So that's why I bring my laptop. Unfortunately, I didn't bring my power pack. So the computer is 100% charged, but it doesn't, I don't think it's gonna last 3 hours. So after this class is over, I'm gonna run downstairs to my office and get my power pack so that I can make it through the next class that's 2 hours long. I don't know what's going on. You know, it's just like I said, the computing office doesn't, the International Studies Department office doesn't open up until 9 o'clock. So there's nobody there. Well, they might just got there right now, but I'll have to work on it later. This is our short class for the European Politics and Society class. And of course, I will open up the notes. Well, before I do that, because I'll forget if I don't do it, let's go to the Cyber Campus Smart Attendance, and we go to European Politics Society, and then we go to attendance, and then make sure I'm sharing the class with you so you can all see, sharing the screen, I should say. So let me open the share screen here and go to Cyber Campus, and you can see your smart attendance number 681. 681 is your smart attendance number. So let me put that into the chat, 681. And there you go. So 681, and please share that with other people if they come late to let them know what the Cyber Campus smart attendance number is. Okay. Okay. So let me go back then. Let me go back to the smart attendance. Okay, I have to be a good role model for you all. Okay, so it's just that I think if I'm doing this in my office, I don't have to wear the mask, and so you can see my lips, and it's a little bit easier for you to understand me as non-native speakers of English. You can actually see my mouth move. So that's my concern, particularly since. But anyway, so let's go back and talk to the, wrong one. Let's go back to the, my notes for the class. And of course, always keep in mind that the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy for Europe. And people are always going to fight and argue about the extent to which the European Union is somehow contributing to this conflict, this war in Ukraine. And of course, the defenders of the European Union are going to say, no, 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 not at all. It's not at all the European Union. The West is not to blame for this. It's the Soviet Union, it's Russia, et cetera, et cetera. But always keep that in mind when we read this week's chapter on Europeanization and subnational authorities. And Anis, if you can't see my screen, please let me know so I don't remember to share screen, because sometimes I forget. So it says here, Europeanization and subnational authorities. And I can keep that in mind because subnational authorities refers to provinces and states within the European Union. And let me see if we can open up those notes here, and we go to subnational authorities. Open up the subnational authorities notes, and again, it's you can see that. And the reason why I'm having some challenge introducing this topic here is because this is incredibly sensitive, right? If nationalism, as we've been talking about throughout the semester, is a challenge to peace in Europe, nationalism associates with stereotyping and emotion. Stereotyping is gross oversimplification of the targets of a policy as either as a source of threat or a source of opportunity. It's a gross oversimplification about the politics within that country, about how it decides how to act, about what motivates and drives it. And nationalism associates with stereotyping, including fear. So nationalism associates with hatred, contempt, fear, joy, powerful emotions. And the fear that, for example, some part of my country might be taken away by a neighbor is a fear or a concern that nationalists in particular are likely to feel if they see that part of their nation is not within the boundaries of the state. So let me go back and open up the lesson plan. And I think I may have already opened up the lesson plan for this class. That we have here. I've been talking about nationalism as a challenge to peace in Europe. I've come up with a brief definition of what nationalism is that I've been referencing here in the class, and highlighting that nationalism is a behavior pattern that associates with somebody who has an intense self-identity with a big, large community of people that they're willing to risk their lives for, and they feel that big, large community, their primary terminal self-identity community, to use complicated social psychological political psychological vocabulary, that primary terminal self-identity community should be sovereign. It should have a state, and it should engage in self-determination of its own destiny, not from an imperial power, not by a neighbor, not overtly or informally, because typically imperialism is done covertly and informally today. The way, for example, the United States tends to dominate the Arabian Peninsula oil sheikdoms. Of course, the U.S. doesn't rule Saudi Arabia, but basically the U.S. embassy is the source of ultimate security for Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis know it, and the Americans know it, and so it's interesting that you see the CIA director, when they really need something from Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family, the CIA director goes to Saudi Arabia because the CIA is so influential there, and that's because in the era of mass politics. Unlike in the 19th century, when you had Queen Victoria, Empress of India, and you had formal empires, that's expensive because that generates intense resistance. That overt formal nationalist empire building generates obvious target for resistance. And so you try to hide your imperial control through informal, covert, informal forms of control. And you work through a local client government or ruling family that governs the country formally on your behalf. And some people, of course, that's the prevailing view in North Korea and Pyongyang towards Seoul, for example, right? That the Seoul government really works for the United States. I'm not saying it does or doesn't, but I'm saying because this whole class is about perceptions. It's about not reality, it's about perceptions of reality. And stereotyping is a simplified perception of reality. And it leads to gross mistakes. And you're seeing it right now, right? With Russia, the prevailing view within Russia, Moscow, being that we can go into Ukraine and overthrow that government and we'll add it back to Russia's sphere of influence. Oh my God, we were grossly wrong. We grossly overestimated our relative capabilities. Oh my God, now what are we gonna do? Or they become more conspiratorial. And it's not just the Russians, the Americans do it. But in terms of going back to the topic for this week about the European Union as a peace strategy for Europe, you need to deal with the fact that many of these nations and the people living within them believe that they have elements of their community living outside of their communities. And they would like to bring them together within the community. And this is called irredentism, right? To bring all Germans within Germany, all Chinese within China, including railroad provinces like Taiwan, reunifying the Korean peninsula, so the Koreans are all together in one state. Russia's irredentist intervention in Ukraine, Serbia's irredentist intervention in Bosnia to reunify the Serbian nation that they believe was wrongfully divided up by the communists in the 1940s. So that 30% of Serbs lived outside of the borders of the Republic of Serbia within the old Yugoslav Federation. Unity irredentism. This comes from an Italian term from Benito Mussolini, described Italians living under Greek or Croat or Slovene domination as unredeemed Italy. Italia irredenta, unredeemed Italy, that needs to be redeemed and uplifted from its degradation of being controlled by those nasty, dirty Croats and Slovenes and Greeks, all right? And so this is the term irredentism. And of course you see, for example, in Israeli nationalism, that greater Israel must have all of the land of Israel, greater Israel, the land of Israel, including what they call Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. the occupied Palestinian territories, and East Jerusalem together with the rest of Jerusalem as the eternal undividable capital of the state of Israel. So this is very, very important motivation. And of course, people who are blinded by their own nationalism, they condemn Russian nationalism and Vladimir Putin's irredentism, referring to it as some kind of mystical image or mission for Russia. Well, we see it with our close ally, Israel. I mean, it's not like something that we don't see elsewhere. But we're the good guys, so if our allies do it, it's not as bad as the bad guys do it. That's pretty much my sense of the prevailing. And we're the good guys because we won the Cold War against the supposed Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. That's the starting point for all of these assumptions today in 2022, in these debates. That no, we're fundamentally good because we saved the world from totalitarianism. We saved the world from communism. So we make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but to equate what America and America's friends do in the Middle East with what Russia's doing in Ukraine, that's not fair. And of course, if you're Moscow, if you're Vladimir Putin, you don't share that worldview. You don't believe that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. But so to get back to this topic about sub-regional authorities, however, if you're going to deal with issues like, for example, what to do with Alsace-Lorraine, or what to do with parts of your country that have large minorities living within them, minority groups living within them that are more or less unhappy about being within that state, then you have to talk about giving those regional authorities some degree of autonomy so that they'll be able to at least acquiesce to the status quo and not try to break off and create their own country or leave one country to join their neighbor. For example, in the case, for example, we're seeing in, I was going to say, in Greece, right, that have the overthrow the regime in Cyprus and try to unify it with Greece. Again, another case of irredentism that led to the Turkish intervention in northern Cyprus. So that's the subtext for this discussion about regional authorities in the European Union. What impact as a peace strategy of as the European Union is in terms of dealing with nationalism and trying to reconcile these conflicting pressures and demands from competing nationalist groups over the same territory. And again, the European Union typically doesn't get enough credit for its successes, because if there isn't, for example, a conflict between a violent potential conflict between Hungary and Romania over the Transylvanian region of Romania, where 2 million Hungarians live, you don't hear about it. It's not in the news because it's a non-event. And European integration, as well as other factors, but European integration is a necessary, if not sufficient, element for explaining why you don't hear more conflict and hostility between Bucharest and Romania and Budapest and Hungary over the status of the Hungarian minority in Romania and Transylvania. Because after World War II, that was a claim of the Hungarian nationalists that under the Treaty of Trianon, named after the palace in France, where Hungary, as a defeated power in World War I, had to give up Transylvania to Romania. The Hungarians always complained about that. They complained about that for years and years and years and years and years. And my sense is that sense that Hungary has not liberated other Hungarians left outside of Hungary is a continuing issue driving much of Hungarian politics today. Like, one of the reasons why Viktor Orban in Hungary is not as supportive of helping Ukraine as other countries in the European Union, like Poland, is because Hungarians believe that the Hungarian minority in Ukraine is facing abuse from Hungarian nationalists. Because going back to the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire, Hungary was a co-equal with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they were sort of like a ruling class in part of the empire. And Slovaks don't like Hungarians, Ukrainians don't like Hungarians, even Croats don't like Hungarians, because Hungary dominated that part of the Habsburg Empire. the Hungarian troops were one of the only set of troops in the Habsburg Empire during World War I that actually fought well. They actually fought on behalf of the empire. They fought well. And so this Hungarian irredentism is the subtext of a lot of this media reporting. The journalists themselves are not really covering very deeply, but given what I know, having studied this since I was a college student, that this is an element of the driving something of the politics in Hungary. This unsatisfied Hungarian irredentism. So that's the lead-in for this discussion of the role of the European Union in encouraging the member states in Spain, in Italy, in other countries to devolve some of the power away from the capital city government, from the national government in Sofia, or the national government in Madrid, or the national government in France, and devolving it and giving it to the sub-regional authority, to regional authorities, to sub-national authorities, to provinces, to localities, for a number of reasons, including for a desire to placate unsatisfied nationalist aspirations and sentiments among some of these groups about being unhappy within a unified Spanish nation state or a Bulgarian nation state. And this is tricky. This is a very sensitive topic because, of course, the claim of many nationalists is that if you give those Catalonians and Catalunya in Barcelona more power, what are they going to do? They're going to use it to get more power. They're not going to stop just with autonomy in running their educational system or autonomy in setting up their own taxation system. They're going to want more and more and more. And they're going to then believe they can really get it because they're already making progress, because Catalonia is getting more and more power devolved from the central government in Madrid, Spain. And you're going to encourage them to be even more nationalistic. And that's the tricky tightrope that the European Union walks along. And as I said, they've been very careful to tell Catalonian nationalists that we're not going to support you entering the European Union. If you leave Spain, you're not going to join the European Union. They just come out and said that. Because the last thing the European Union officials and authorities want is for Spanish citizens or other citizens to believe that if we join the European Union, it will contribute to the breakup of our nation. Ah! No. Except maybe if you're the United Kingdom. Since Britain already left the European Union, Scottish nationalism will probably continue to be an issue. I personally doubt that Scotland's going to break away from the United Kingdom and join the European Union, try to join the European Union. For one, the European Union is not going to encourage that because they don't want to look like they're encouraging the United Kingdom to break up. And it's expensive, and but we'll talk more about that later. But by the way, after our last class where we did talk about what was going on in Switzerland, since we have a Swiss student here. So, I always want to try to make the class, more interesting to students by showing how it's an important topic. I did check again what's happened in the year since I showed that, what did I do with it? How Switzerland and the European Union were negotiating about coming up with a new framework for Switzerland being de facto integrated in the European economic space, European Union common market, single space without being in the European Union. And that report I cited from exactly a year ago reported that at the last class that the Swiss and the European Union had broken off negotiations, and that but this is the latest report that I was able to find. Again, I think it's from a Swiss news source, just to show you what, again, this is exactly a year later. This is from this month, May of 2022. They're trying to restart negotiations. The European Union has asked Switzerland to send written responses to a series of open questions as talks seem unable to resolve the current political impasse and to advance negotiations on individual agreements. So I just wanted to highlight here that they were trying to negotiate a mechanism or framework for making it easier to integrate Switzerland in with the European common market to come up with a draft treaty. This treaty would have replaced more than 120 bilateral treaties, which have been regulated relations between the European Union and Switzerland for past decades. Switzerland is now forced to negotiate each agreement with the European Union on an individual basis. And the European Union wants the European Court of Justice to be the official body if there's a trade dispute or argument between the European Union and Switzerland under this new treaty that's being discussed. It's not been adopted or written down yet, that the European Court of Justice would be the final body to adjudicate the treaty, and Switzerland says no. And they said that a year ago, and then nothing really happened since then. This is the most recent report. Nothing really happened since a year ago. And now they're trying to restart these negotiations. And of course, it sounds reminiscent of Brexit and the British Brexit supporters not wanting the European Court of Justice to have sovereignty over British law, but there's no reference to settlement, like people being able to move to Switzerland and settle there with full rights as Swiss citizens coming from European Union states to Switzerland. That's no reference in the statement. It's a very brief statement. So nothing's really happened in the year since I showed you that last report. But back to the, let's look at the notes on subnational authorities. So that's the subtext about why this is an important, sensitive, touchy topic. Not so much for Germany, because there's not much discussion about German states breaking away from Germany, although there is a longer history of Bavaria, for example. Bavaria, there's a strong sense of Bavarian identity that goes back for centuries, but it's more an issue for Spain. It's more an issue for, well, it was an issue for the United Kingdom. How much does European integration actually encourage Catalonian nationalism or Basque nationalism? Where did this, why is this an important focus of the European Union about subnational authorities becoming more important? And we highlighted the principle of subsidiarity, that the European Union tries to defend itself by saying the European Union is not going to take up any new powers and responsibilities unless it absolutely has to. In other words, we want the lowest level of government possible to address a problem to be responsible for addressing a particular problem. An issue or policy issue or problem should only go up to the European Union if that's the best place to address it. And again, it's a focus in European integration of trying to get people to stop thinking about themselves as citizens in the Republic of France controlled by Paris. Stop focusing on Madrid. Stop focusing on Rome. Stop focusing on Berlin. Stop focusing on Sofia. Stop focusing on Athens. You can live a full, wonderful life by thinking of yourself in a more sophisticated, complex way. In other words, trying to lessen this attitudinal predisposition towards acting nationalistically as a result of institutionalized focus on the nation state, the nation state, the nation state that has emerged in Europe, at least since the French Revolution, right? So, and so that's why, I mean, again, from that perspective, to focus upon this role of subnational authorities is part of this effort to try to de-emphasize the state of the nation and the sovereignty of the state of the nation that has been one major source of violence in Europe for the last few centuries. So what has been the subnational authorities? Have they gotten more power as a result of the European Union in all of these different states? And just to jump ahead to what I touched upon earlier, what the author finds in this chapter is that European integration has not really changed fundamentally the relationship of the regions to the central government in these states. If their history before European integration still dominates and controls the relationship between the sub-regional government, the subnational government, and the national government today. The European Union has not really changed that trajectory. In other words, there's not one method of Europeanization of the increasing power of the regional authorities in the member states across all 27 countries. It's not like all of the regional governments in the European Union's 27 member states are becoming more and more powerful. If they were not powerful before they joined the European Union, they tend not to be powerful today. Even though the European Union might want to support that or be open to that, it's an issue for Bulgarians. For example, what is the relationship of the regional authorities to the Bulgarian central government? They were always weak under communism, and they're still weak today. Although still, they're not unimportant, they have not fundamentally changed as a consequence of European integration. And sometimes to the irritation of the European Union. So that's jumping ahead to the conclusion. Now, this conflict of regional national groups like the Catalonians and the Basques towards Spain's central government, that goes way back to the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, a big part of the Spanish Civil War was the unhappiness of the Catalonians in being dominated, in their view, dominated and controlled by Madrid, the Castilian Spanish in Madrid. And that's still an issue today. And so let's go through the notes a bit here, because we want to focus on the subnational authorities' response to European integration and the subnational response to the fact that countries which they are part of themselves are not part of the European Union. So one 2005 study, so it's already 17 years old, you know, that's pretty old, right? Study reviewing research on the impact of the European Union on subnational authorities reached the following conclusions regarding the impact of the European Union on subnational policies, politics, and polity effect. One, European integration changes the relationship between the regional and central authorities. It means that the national central authorities are no longer the only superior authorities that the subnational authorities must take into account. Okay, that's good. And maybe that's a good thing if you want to avoid social competition, that the belief, if you're a Barcelonian, Catalonian nationalist in Barcelona, which is the capital of Catalonia, right? That Barcelona's loss is Madrid's gain, and Madrid's loss is Barcelona's gain. If you become more sophisticated in your thinking, because we're all part of this European integration mechanism, then one's less likely to engage in zero-sum thinking, that your gain is my loss, my gain is your loss. We can think in a more complex way. Remember, stereotyping is about simplification. It's about zero-sum thinking. So we don't like zero-sum thinking. We don't like social competition. We want people to believe that their interaction can be win-win, win-win. Social creativity and social mobility are promoted through European integration. And that has been a factor, right? But still, you know, like I said earlier, if you're a Catalonian and you think you're one of the great peoples of Europe, and you want your own state, there's only 200 states in the world. It's really cool to have your own state. Little Iceland of 300,000 people has a state. Estonia, 1.2 million has a state. Latvia, another, I don't know, 2 million people has a state. And we Catalonians, we don't get our own state. It's not fair. And if you have your own state, I mean, it's really cool. You're in the United Nations. You are formally consulted by the other state governments of the human race, divided into 200 states, being consulted in the United Nations, in all the United Nations organizations, and all the international treaty organizations. You have a member there representing you, Estonia, Iceland, Denmark, Latvia. But no, we Catalonians, we've got to go through Madrid. Oh, those lazy Castilian Spanish in the stereotype. That take and tax us after all of our hard work to subsidize their lazy lifestyle. And that's how Catalonian nationalists talk. Spain is a big cow, and the mouth is in Barcelona, and the udder, where the milk comes, the benefits of all our work are in Madrid. So that's why you have to be very careful with this peace strategy. I mean, one of the reasons why, you know, people were dying in Spain as the Catalonians and the Basques were killing the Spanish police under Franco and afterwards. And the violence has stopped in Spain. The Basques separatist movement, the ETA, called a ceasefire about, 20 years ago at least. So, but still, there are Catalonian nationalists who say, we want to be an independent country because we deserve it. Just like we're no less than anybody else. Policy effect of European integration on subnational authorities. European integration legally affects the policy competencies of subnational authorities. It does so notably through the European Union's regional policies. So the European Union has explicit regional policies to develop the poor regions of Europe in particular. The poor regions, they call that European Union cohesion policy. So that the European Union has encouraged the member states to develop their regional government structures, if only to target and direct European Union cohesion funds and European Union development policies towards the poor areas of a country, so that there's somebody to work with. There's a regional government to work with to uplift that poor region. And the politics effects, it motivates the subnational authority to seek direct and indirect influence within the European decision-making. Again, if you have a tradition of being a powerful regional government, you're more likely to take this seriously and actually, like, for example, have an office in Brussels representing Catalonia. And that office will have a lot of good people working in it, and it'll be active. If you don't have a history, before you join the European Union, it's not going to suddenly emerge within your country and as an actor, despite what the European Union's promotion of development of a regional government to direct funds to for development. So the European Union has differential impact, with more powerful subnational authorities experiencing the strongest EU impact. Yeah, so if you have a tradition of strong regional governments, they're going to benefit the most from the European Union's impact. They also have the most political resources to respond actively. So these powerful subnational authorities demonstrate varying degrees of involvement in European Union policymaking. The policy of, and again, just to, again, keep you excited about this topic. I mean, another reason why this is important is because any kind of peace strategy for Ukraine is probably going to have to involve some kind of, if it's not going to be partition, where the parts conquered by Russia are added to Russia, then there's going to have to be some kind of compromise in which regional parts of Ukraine have special relationships with outside actors like the European Union, the Ukrainian government, Russia. But even as I say this, I mean, it looks like that basically what's going on right now is that Ukraine is going to be partitioned. I mean, even it's fluid and changing quickly, but even the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, has said this is going to have to be settled at the negotiating table. We're going to have to compromise, reach negotiating. In other words, going to basically accept the fact that Donbass is going to be part of Russia. Anyway, but back to this here. The policy effect on the European Union on subnational authorities has been evident in that they have implemented European Union policies within their jurisdictions, clearly adapting to European integration. All right. But overall, in terms of politics effects, and particularly in terms of polity effects, the changes have been rather modest and especially differential because of the mediating effects of unique domestic institutions. So in other words, yeah, unique Spanish history, Italian history, German history, French history, and so on. Regarding the impact of European integration on domestic intergovernmental relations within member states, 2006 research indicates modest but differential impacts. As a polity effect, in terms of the nature of the state in these countries, it finds that the especially strong subnational authorities have strengthened their positions further vis-a-vis their central authorities. Yeah. Right. So, that's an important point to keep in mind. The Federal Republic of Germany consists of states. Länder is the German term, and these states are part of a federal system, and they have tremendous authority. So they have really developed it further within post-war Germany as important subnational authority actors. Again, Germany is sort of like, well, it was explicitly developed within the context of Europeanization in the Cold War, right? So Germany is in a lot of ways sort of like a blueprint for what a European integration or European United States of Europe would look like, right? Where you have powerful Länder, but still one sovereign German government, with the German government being responsible for security and foreign affairs. But like, for example, medical care policy, education policy in Germany, unemployment policy, these are all done, implemented at the state level in Germany. So Germany really is the model for the ideal of how a devolved European Union central government, member state central government would look like, so that the national authorities are not the only authorities within the member state, that the national authorities devolve lots of power to the regional authorities. You know, it's interesting. You know, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent here, but you know, I have an aunt, a couple of aunts in Rome I go see, and I haven't been there in a while because of the pandemic, and my aunt is evidently sick. But I would go and stay in her place and watch Italian news on the television, and they would have the weather report. And I remember watching over the years how they showed the map, the weather map of Europe, and they had divided up Europe into states, France, Italy. And then several years ago, they stopped doing that. They started showing the weather map of Europe by the provinces. Like, you couldn't see the borders of Italy versus France versus Germany, but you could see the region of Abruzzo or the region of Bavaria. The weather map was only showing the regional governments of Europe. He said, what? Are they trying to brainwash me? Don't be a nationalist. Don't think about yourself as an Italian. Be European, a Europe of regions. Yes, yes, Ben, you like that? And then they stopped doing that. They went back to the old map. This is about 5 years ago. They went back to the old map of a Europe of states. And if you're a conspiratorial type, you might say this is a part of their strategy. They want us to forget or ignore the fact that we're Italians and become all European. But anyway, so these are my comments here. So I don't know if we're going to spend time on my comments. You can read my comments on your own. Everything here that's between these kind of parentheses, these are my comments. So this chapter focuses on the European Union's impact on, 1, the position of subnational authorities within national politics, 2, the regional policies at the regional level, and 3, the policies of the European Union member states. So how does it affect the nature of the nation state in Europe as the subnational authorities come to play in a more important, or at least salient, role in European integration? It moves, this chapter moves away from deterministic approaches that focus rather on the oversimplified question as to whether the European Union has empowered or disempowered regions. The analysis of Europeanization of subnational authorities should include, more specifically, the Europeanization of subnational authority political procedures. So this means, how much do people think about the European Union institutions if you're a state government, a regional government in Italy or France or Germany or Spain, and how does it affect, how does the awareness that there are European Union institutions like the European Parliament and the European Commission affect how you act as a regional politician? Because you're looking for resources. I want to win. I want to get reelected. I have an ambitious political career. I want to pursue. I want to rise up. How can I use Europe to help me get what I want, to win in my struggles, to get more prestige, to get more political opportunities, these are all, that's what Europeanization means, right? The Europeanization of subnational authorities, cognitive processes, whatever that means. I think that means identities, and the Europeanization of the contents of subnational authority policies. And this study distinguishes between Europeanization of subnational authorities in relation to politics and the polity. So the polity is more reference to the state, the structure of the state. Politics refers to politicians competing with each other for support and trying to win elections as a very critical part of that. It is challenging because, of course, they are interrelated, but it is necessary to understand more fully the impact of the European Union on the member states rather than assuming constitutional political issues as the same phenomenon. So constitutional refers to polity. issues, like how does it affect the constitution of the state versus the politics going on within the state. And so distinguishing between polity, policy, and political effects is also useful because it facilitates identifying independent, dependent, and intermediating variables. There's a lot of political science language here. So the sections of this chapter each contain empirical studies regarding European Union regional policies, which are cohesion policy and structural funds. So those are the two general terms for, well, what had been before the pandemic, European Union budget was 130 billion euros. And more than half of that went to cohesion policy and structural policy funds. Now, so that's say 70 billion euros. And 70 billion euros goes a long way in a poor country like Bulgaria, or a poor country like Hungary, or a poor country like Poland. And that has definitely had an impact in terms of the regional development of these countries, because there are certain areas within these countries. And again, Italy was the model 70 years ago. There was the rich north and the poor south. But today, if you go to Poland, for example, and you go to Warsaw, Warsaw looks like a modern European city. But there are places in Poland, particularly on the border with Belarus, that look poor. They don't look like what you imagine in Western Europe. Or Bulgaria, where I was spent time in Sofia. It's like Sofia is the center of the universe in Bulgaria. If you have ambition, if you have drive, if you want to live the best lifestyle, you go to Sofia. And it's like that here in South Korea. It's a problem here in South Korea that the Korean authorities try to deal with. That everybody focuses on Seoul, Seoul, Seoul. You want the best schools, move to Seoul. You want the best hospitals, you got to move to Seoul. If you want the best education, go to Seoul. And trying to get people to move away from that means trying to convince them that you don't need to live in the capital to have the best of what it means to be Korean. And that's a dominant issue in many of these countries, in Eastern Europe in particular. So that means trying to develop the poor regions, and the money, the agricultural funds are not part of this cohesion policy and structural funds, but they're also very important because typically the agricultural funds to support agriculture through the common agricultural policy typically goes to rural areas, right? So rural areas tend to be poor, farming areas. That's not to be underestimated. The importance of getting access to those funds in shaping the development of these polities and the politics and the constitutions of these states to get access to those European Union funds, because the European Union wants evidence that those regional funds are being used effectively. And it's not always easy to get, and a lot of the money gets stolen. Corruption is a big problem, particularly in these former communist countries. But it also is a way by which to co-opt or incentivize these emerging political actors who are anti-communist, who emerged after the breakup of communism, that yeah, the European Union might be a pain or headache because it's talking about gay rights and other kinds of policies that we don't like, but at the same time, they give us a lot of money for our economies and particularly our poor regions. So we're going to acquiesce to the European Union, or at least not respond with great hostility to the European Union, criticizing our internal policy, our internal policies. The European Union, the subnational authorities are categorized for study using the nomenclature of territorial units for statistics, or NUTS. So this is the website and the system the European Union uses to figure out how to allocate the money to be used to develop the poor regions of the European Union. And it divides European Union into territorial units. Its purpose is to collect statistics and make socioeconomic analysis and develop regional policies. And cultural, linguistic, and even ethnic regions can also be followed within the system, even though that system has its basis in economic parameters, because it's focused on structural and cohesion policies. So NUTS 1 focuses on major socioeconomic regions. Nuts 2 focuses on basic regions for the application of regional policies. And Nuts 3 focuses on small regions for specific policy diagnoses. So, so you can see how the European Union has a functional justification for why, you know, if we're going to help you develop the poorest parts of your country, Hungary or Poland or Bulgaria, we need statistics. You can't fix a problem if you can't measure it. How can you address a problem if you can't measure it? So you need to come up with mechanisms, institutions for measuring what's going on, so we can evaluate the impact of our policies, so we can know if people are making more money, so we have some idea of the inequality and the distribution of benefits. So you see the Europeanization of subnational policies, regional implementation of EU policies. And I'm trying to keep track of the time here because it's our short class. So maybe that's a good place to stop and to show you, you know, some of the subtext for some of this discussion, right? Because this is not really a focus of the chapter, but of course this focus here on Catalonian independence, for example, you see here. Here's a report about Catalonia. That 4 years ago, Catalonia made a major effort to try to declare independence from Spain. So, and that the leaders of this effort by the Catalonian government fled and went to Belgium, claiming that he was a member of the European Parliament, so claiming parliamentary immunity through the European Union Parliament membership. So if you're a Spanish nationalist, a Franco type supporter, this is going to infuriate you that the European Union is encouraging these people to try to break up my beloved homeland. And so, and then of course they bring in Germany. So then he fled. It says here, fugitive former Catalan leader Charles Puigdemont has made a renewed call for Spanish authorities to open negotiations of Catalan's secession claim a day after he was released from a German prison. So Mr. Puigdemont told reporters he hoped the German court's decision not to extradite him to Spain on charge of rebellion shows that dialogue is needed to diffuse the political conflict in his home country. I hope the situation could help Spanish authorities understand that political measures are needed. So again, we're running out of time here. And so what's the point I want to highlight? The European Union wants to encourage dialogue, discussion, blah, 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 blah. But blah, 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 blah is better than or bombs being blown up, like what's happening in Spain under the Franco regime by the resistance from the Catalonians and the Basques. So yeah, it's a lot of talk, it's a lot of procedures, it's a lot of court proceedings and deliberations, and that's complicated and slow, but it's better than people killing each other. And so you can see this, the issue of breaking central ties with the rest of Spain has divided the 7.5 million residents of the wealthy Catalonia region in half. Pro-independence parties managed to maintain their slim majority in the regional parliament during a local election in December. It must be December 2017. The pro-independence party have since been locked in negotiations on how to form a government. So you can't say that all Catalonians support nationalist independence, that all Catalonians want an independent nation state. No, but that's the fact about nationalism, that when the typical citizen, the most common category of political attitude is nationalistic, those people are intensely motivated. In the United States, or in Catalonia, or in Ukraine, or Northern Ireland. And those people are the militants, and because they're militant, they're motivated and committed, and they tend to have a disproportionate influence in the political system. That's just a feature of nationalism. So, and so it says here, Mr. Puigdemont told reporters he would stay in Berlin until his extradition case is concluded. If he's not sent back to Spain, he plans to return to Belgium, where he has established residency since fleeing from Spain in October. The former Catalonian leader was detained on a European arrest warrant after entering Germany. And then I think what Gloria was highlighting, how he showed up at a Catalonian festival in Sardinia, because there's a Catalonian minority on the island of Sardinia. Because if you're a Catalonian, you know about your glorious medieval history, that you had a Catalonian empire that conquered Sardinia and even occupied Athens in the 13th century. Yes, we're glorious. We had a golden age, and we will have that age, that time again through independence. So this memory, collective memory of a medieval golden age is an indicator of nationalistic predisposition sentiment in terms of behavior. Okay, we have to stop there because I need to go get my power pack downstairs because this computer's not working. So that's it for today, okay? Bye.